Hello, I'm Darren Ingram with Sight and Sound Theaters, and this is the second video talking about integrating TouchOSC on the iPad with Nuendo. I have a Mac set up, so hopefully things won't look that much different if you're running on a PC. Alright, the first thing you do when you download the TouchOSC application from the App Store is we need to get it hooked up to Osculator. Osculator is the third-party application that turns OSC commands into MIDI commands and vice versa. TouchOSC only speaks OSC, Nuendo only speaks MIDI. So this is our TouchOSC application on the iPad that we see here. Up here in the upper corner we have the eye icon, that's information, and it's going to show us our connections. Right here you can see we're sending OSC data to Thor. That's my desktop, so if you see Thor, that's talking about the computer that's actually running Nuendo. So it's sending OSC data on the network, wireless network, to Thor. It found the oscillator over there. So TouchOSC is not talking to Nuendo, it's talking to Osculator. Ta-da! This is Osculator. You can see OSC input port 8000. That was a default setting. Hopefully you won't have to mess with this. This just came up automatically. Now, Osculator and TouchOSC are talking to each other. Now we need to get Osculator talking to Nuendo. Over here in Nuendo, at the top, menus are devices, and down at the bottom is device setup. This is where the action is going to happen in Nuendo. Generic remote is what we're going to use, and when you select generic remote, it brings up MIDI input and output. Osculator, when it's running, creates a couple of virtual MIDI channels, a MIDI input and a MIDI output, so Nuendo is going to see those. Coming from Osculator out, we want to go into our MIDI input, and coming from Nuendo on our MIDI output, we want to go to the Osculator in. You can see there, port 8000. So now they're talking. Nuendo is now talking to Osculator, Osculator talking to TouchOSC. Let's make magic. So what we need to do is open up the TouchOSC editor and let's make a widget. The TouchOSC editor is free from Hexler.net, same people who make TouchOSC. You can see here it comes up ready to make something for the iPhone, iPod Touch. We don't want that, we want the iPad. Now the iPad is set to be shown vertically, up and down. I don't want that, I want horizontally. So we're going to say change the orientation to horizontal. There. Now let's expand the window so we can see the whole thing. There we go. Now we can kind of see that represents the entire screen of the iPad. Let's create a widget. So you right click. These are all the different kinds of widgets that TouchOSC can make. You can play with those. The one we're interested in right now is a fader. We want a vertical fader. However, see fader V for vertical, fader H for horizontal. I want a vertical one going up and down. However, when I create that, even though I've told it that I want the iPad orientation to be horizontal, it still reads a vertical fader as going according to a horizontal orientation or a vertical orientation. So we have to select a horizontal fader in order for it to show up and down. So that's our fader. Simple. This is about as easy as it gets. Now what we need to do is define that fader in TouchOSC language. All we have to do is tell it what we want to call that widget. We want to call it control room volume. Keep it all one word. I've had trouble if I use spaces on there. I say call it control room volume. Now look down here. It's going to put in our OSC, let me see if I can zoom in there. It calls it this. /1/CR volume. That's what we named our widget. This is the actual OSC channel that it's going to be transmitting to Osculator. It's going to see data on this channel. Alright, so now that we've done that, let's save our window as Control Room OSC Demo. Alright. Now, what this means over here on this channel, /1/CR volume. /1 means page 1. You can have multiple pages in TouchOSC. You can flip back and forth between them. This is page 1, the widget called CR volume. That's how it defines that channel. Now, over here in TouchOSC, let's go back to our iPad. You can see this is the template I was working with. We want to load in the template I just had made that widget in. So let's go over to our settings. Now up here we're going to hit sync in our TouchOSC editor. When we hit that, it's going to come up with this window saying layout sync. Look at number 2 there. Open TouchOSC and go to layout add. This is our TouchOSC. This is in our information. Here's layout. Add. These are all the templates you can load in to TouchOSC. We want to add one. It's going to look for our local hosts. It found Thor, the desktop, which is where the editor is sitting. So I hit that, and automatically load it in. There it is, CROSC demo, just like that. We tell it to load that in, hit done. There's our widget right there. Now, it's just a widget. It doesn't know what it's supposed to do. So what we need to do is tell Osculator what we want to do with that data. So let's go over here and let's open up Osculator. There. Osculator just sitting there waiting for data. Osculator is real time. It will show you data flowing in and out of it in real time. But see, there's nothing because I'm not doing anything to that widget. I'm going to reach down here. I'm going to move this widget. Watch this. Up and down. Now that sent data on CR volume, /1/CR volume to Osculator, which found it. It said, hey, there's data coming in on /1/CR volume, but I don't know what to do with it. We have some options here: event type, value, and MIDI channel. This is MIDI channel, MIDI address within that channel, and the type of data we're going to send. You can do Wiimotes on this if you want, so you can control Nuendo data with by waving a Wiimote around in the air, but we don't want that. We want MIDI continuous controller data. Let's send it on MIDI channel 16. And you have 128 addresses within each MIDI channel to send on. Let's just pick 0 to 127. Now, what this is saying is from TouchOSC, that CR volume that we defined, /1/CR volume, page 1, widget called CR volume on page 1, we're going to change it into MIDI controller data and send it on MIDI channel 16, address 0. Now, it doesn't even know Nuendo at this point. We have to tell Nuendo to look at Osculator. Now, we did that when we went to our devices. In our device setup, we defined it to look at Osculator and to send to Osculator. But now we need to define what we want that channel 16 address 0 to do. So let's make a device. So it made us a default device reading MIDI channel 1 address 0. Let's call this one. You can call this one anything you want, because this is just within Nuendo's own referencing. CR volume. Anything you want to call that. Now, we know that it's coming in on MIDI channel 16 address 0, but let's say that we didn't know. You can hit learn, and when I move this fader over here, it's going to send data to OSC on the MIDI channel CR volume, or the OSC channel, and then Osculator will convert that into MIDI data and send it to Nuendo. Now what that learn is doing is it's listening in real time to any MIDI data coming in. So I'm going to reach down here right now and move this fader like I did before and watch MIDI channel. Changed it to 16. That's where it found the data coming in on. So I'm going to turn learn off because that could cause problems if it's listening all the time. And some other MIDI fires off. Now, we've created a device listening to MIDI channel 16 address 0. Now this window is where this upper window is what we connect to Osculator with. We define the MIDI channel and address that Osculator is operating on. Down here you can see it created a device down here, and if I click, see it automatically says, oh, you renamed it control volume. What do you want to do with it? What data do you want to send and receive on MIDI channel 16 address 0? So I say device. I could kiss the Steinberg guys. They hooked up everything within Nuendo can be controlled on a MIDI command. What we want is the VST control room. Now within our control room, we tell it we want the control room section itself. We could select the talkback and isoboost. Let's do control room. What do we want to send about the control room or receive? There's all these options. Listen volume, we can select studios, all that kind of stuff. We just want to control the volume. Now, we want to, up here on flags, we have to tell it what we want to do with the data. We want to receive data, transmit. I won't get into relative right now. Receive. Let's receive it from TouchOSC, and let's control the control room volume with it. Let's hit apply. And if we did our job over here in Nuendo, you could see this is the volume control right here, that fader. When I move this, theoretically, that should move as well because we're sending data from TouchOSC to here. There it is. Now, what happens if I move the fader on here? Ah, see, it's not sending now. So let's go back to our devices, because we only defined that device to receive. So when I say I also want to transmit data, okay, look here. TouchOSC says, hey, wait a second, you're also transmitting data. Let's zoom that in a little. You're also transmitting data, MIDI data. Oscillator's receiving on channel 16.0. So when it receives it automatically like that, it's going to say, oh, you want OSC routing. We can define any kind of routing we want. But it says, let's change that into OSC routing, and let's send it back to where it came from, /1/CR volume. Notice there is no MIDI channel here. This is the channel. This is the OSC channel it's sending on. So now if we switch back over to, look over here, because we were setting this up to move, you can see our fader moving there. But now if we also move this fader on the control room, it also defines that fader. So they are always talking to each other. Alright, this is the first part of the video. The second video we're going to define, instead of defining it from TouchOSC going into Nuendo, we're going to do the reverse. We're going to define something in Nuendo first, and then we're going to route it to TouchOSC.